the Sales Proformance Show, your source of inspiration in the world of sales and business development. Here we blend cutting-edge sales strategies with personal development, helping you achieve not just professional success, but also personal fulfillment. You'll hear from the experts to help unlock your true potential. And now here's your host, David Sliman.
Welcome to the Sales Proformance Podcast Show. I am your host, Dave Sliman, and I could not be more pumped about our guest today. She is a true entrepreneur in the catering space. And more than just talk about her business, we're going to talk about her business, but we're really going to deep dive the roadmap and her experiences of starting her business and where she is today. I mean, I've worked with her for years in the marketing and advertising space with her and her husband, and we became really close. She's a great friend. And if you're thinking about starting a business, if you're running an organization or a business, you're going to want to hear a great story today. You're going to learn a lot. So let's welcome Emily Garner to the show. Emily, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So really quick, listen, you have two companies right now, Emily's Events and Fly Cuisine. Give our listeners a little bit of background about the companies. And then more importantly, can you share the pivotal moment or the experience that really inspired you to start these companies?
Okay, so I own an event planning company. My husband and I also happen to be chefs. So 17 years ago, I started Emily's Events. It's a catering company. We do everything from weddings to birthday parties, sort of a very open for whatever business sort of comes our way, and working with the people, making sure we're a right fit. So that's Emily's Events. And that sort of began to, over time, segue into almost three businesses where corporate catering had its own space and its own clientele. And then Emily's Events with the private stuff where I would come to your house and we would figure out what you're trying to accomplish with the party. And then about 2 years into that business, we started catering for private jets. And that business became referred to and now is called Fly Cuisine. So we sort of had three running under Emily's Events. And I didn't really realize how important that was until I started getting asked the hard questions like, tell me who your ideal client is. Tell me what they are looking for, what's important to them. And as I tried to answer that question, I kind of got stumped because they're also very different. And it was at that time we started to sort of separate the companies.
Yeah, that's great. And what was the pivotal moment when you started your first company? What were you doing, and when did that light bulb go off? And you said, or did you always want to be an entrepreneur? I mean, there's some people who are no, okay, good, because and have the skills to do it, and they fall into it, and then there's other people who are born to do it, and there's others who, like yourself, no, you weren't planning on it, and it came. So how did this all come about?
Well, I mean, throughout my life, I'd been sort of in the food and restaurant business for a long time. I was working on degrees in psychology back home in Chicago when I got a phone call from my mom that my father had a stroke, and I'm an only child. So the decision was made that I would come out and help. And when I relocated, it became kind of evident that I needed to get a job quickly while I figured out what I was going to do. I was trying to work on my PhD back home. So when I moved out here, I got a job waiting tables because I'd been waiting tables forever while I was in school. And I got a job waiting tables and wound up in a private country club that I loved, and working there for about 4 years upon moving here to Arizona. So, I was working at the club and I loved it. And some of the members were asking me to help with their parties outside of the club. And I was obliging and realized I loved it. And I just made a decision somewhere around Labor Day just to give it a shot. The club no longer wanted us to work for residents outside of the club, and they passed sort of a rule, and it was a crossroads. And I made the decision to go downtown Phoenix and get my business license. That's what I did.
That's the way to do it. Listen, one door shuts and the other one opens. We were just talking about that in another podcast. But I'll tell you what, think back years ago, and I think we touched on this before in many of our conversations, but many entrepreneurs face challenges very, very, very early on. And what's the most unexpected obstacle you encountered, and how did you overcome it in the beginning?
It's funny, you ask a question like that and people are going to know exactly their answer, because it's such a gut punch when it happens and you're just cranking along and you don't expect it. Mine was in the form of, actually, funny enough, I was being interviewed on a radio show, and I had a key employee at that time wearing multiple hats. I'm wearing multiple hats. They're wearing multiple hats. And at that time, they had to decide to move very unexpectedly, without a lot of notice and in not the best way. I won't get into any details with that, but it really wasn't expected. And I think because I had allowed so many things to be handled by this person, that when they just up and left, I just remember, I think I even told you about this back 17 years ago when I first met you, but I walked into my office and I shut the door and I was like, who in the world do I think I am? Like, people are relying on me to pay their mortgage. Like, what am I doing? Am I playing house? And now I learned, that's called imposter syndrome. Fully blown, shut the door and just panicked, and had this moment where I just slid down the back of the door and sat there on the floor like, what have I done? And it was that moment, I think, of having to eventually stand back up. I know it's like a metaphor, but I'm 100% I realized at that moment, you always are going to have to get back up anyway. So the quicker you can transition from the gut punch to just moving on and solving it, the better. And I've actually gotten, they happen, right? And I've gotten better at it. So much so, almost to my husband's chagrin. He's like, why aren't you getting more freaked out about this? Why aren't you? Well, because after you freak out, you still have to be productive, and you still have to lead by example, and you still have to cast the right vision. And if you're losing your mind, none of that can happen. So I've gotten better at it. But let me tell you, that was a day I'll never forget.
Yeah, I think if you're going to listen back on this podcast, listen to that right there, because listen, we all get smacked around, and sometimes even business owners are so close even to getting where they need to be, and they're so close and they get smacked one more time and they just fold. Yeah. But ultimately, I think you said it best here. The hits aren't going to stop coming. Mm-mm. You have to be able to work through them. And like you did, you learn from it. You learn from the mistake. They're only mistakes if you don't learn from them, you repeat them. So I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And I think that's a really important message for this. Listen, risks are a big part of being an entrepreneur, right?
Yep.
Can you think of one risk that you took for your business that really paid off for yourself?
Sure. How about this one? So I was meant to go on vacation with a friend. We were heading to Paris, and tickets booked. Monday was the flight. And on Saturday, I got the phone call to do my first Fly Cuisine order. Mm-hmm. And I just had a feeling like it was going to be something. And whole vacation done and paid for, gone 3 weeks, had a friend in it, whole thing. And I didn't get on the plane. Okay. I sat there on that Saturday and watched those planes take off from my office, and just decided, if I'm going to do this, I have to be able to commit to it. I have to be able to put the business first. And I guess I realized then too, that your business becomes like your baby. If you don't have kids, if you have kids, you've already learned this lesson that you are no longer number one. But starting my business, I learned that very quickly. Yes. If you're going to commit to it, you need to commit to it. And, thank God my friend forgave me. It cost a little bit, but yeah, I didn't get on that plane. And here we are. I think it's now 15 years later with that business, and it's thriving.
What a story. And that's a pivotal moment right there. I mean, some people have vision and others have commitment. And I'll take commitment over anything any day of the week. Because when entrepreneurs are committed to their process and committed to their brand and committed to their business, they really can do anything. And I'm not just saying that metaphorically. I mean, it's a lot of work, and I don't want to sound cheesy about it, but you can, if you've got the commitment, that's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of it. Let's talk about networking. Plays a big part of being an entrepreneur. How have you leveraged your networking to grow your business on both sides, with partners or clients? I mean, are there any things that you do right now? Obviously, the food speaks for itself. We've done some, you've been catered my parties years back, but what about your networking? What do you do right now?
I'm kind of an anomaly. So you can listen to this next part with caution. And you can speak to this. Like, I don't even have my name on my building. And I've been, I've been in there 17 years. So I don't advertise a lot. In fact, the only advertising I have ever done was actually with you. And that is it. So networking groups, women owners in Arizona, like I've been to a couple meetings that I was invited to, but I mean, from the minute I walked in that door, I've been very busy, and I've been so fortunate. My clients are so amazing, and I have a wonderful word of mouth network. My business cards are at my parties, and if somebody from one area of the valley attends and grabs that card and brings it to their area, then I sort of get passed around those friends for a while, and it's just created this wonderful network of clients. And they have been doing all the work for me. We're so busy. I didn't a lot for any of that. So it's not a normal business model, certainly, but it has really worked. The word of mouth has really, really worked for me. And then now, I've hired a Cracker Jack social media gal. So you've probably noticed a lot of new posts.
Great. Yes.
So she's doing great. And that's
show
a lot of people.
Show it. It's great. It's great for sure. Listen, there's so much I want to unpack here, right? Because your industry is very competitive, because I think you, at least in my eyes, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're dealing with the mom and pops who are doing catering, and then you've got your bigger organizations that are doing catering, the corporate locations. So how do you separate yourself apart from that, in this competitive market? I mean, because I got to believe it's pretty competitive.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. The first 8 years or so that I was doing business and being strictly word of mouth, like, I don't want to sound like a dinosaur, but it wasn't such a big thing, Googling to find, it was really your best friend tells you, oh my God, you've got to use Emily. And then the trust and all of that sort of came naturally. Strangers starting to call you when you get your AdWords figured out on Google and people are searching you. It's a little bit more of a struggle to reach them and let them know who you are and what you do and why you have the reputation you have. We approach things a little bit differently. So that piece was a kind of a difficult thing to navigate, is to say, like, to people, what are you looking to spend, was our biggest hurdle. Because people want to know what they can get, like the most they can get for their buck, which we fully understand, but I need to know what that parameter is, and then we fill it. We don't have any set menus. We've done everything so custom. So that piece was, I guess, difficult to navigate.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, right? Identifying the type of client that you want. I'm sure you're very selective, right? And who you identify as your client. And I encourage all of you out there who may be thinking about running a business or haven't done this exercise, identify the type of client you want for your business, or the type of targets. And every business might be a little bit different, but I think it's something you said earlier. And I think it's a point that we should bring back to the table here, which is identifying your client. And obviously you have to have a great product too. I mean, it's only going to carry you so long.
And that identification, I mean, that solves a lot because that will help you understand how to target your marketing. It
Yes.
will help you understand how to target your website, how to build it for what they're looking for. And that's why it was difficult for me when I realized, oh my gosh, I've got 3 totally different clients here, and I had to make decisions then based on that. But it is very important and what they're looking for. Like, what are the top 5 things that are most important to your client? Writing that down and seeing it on paper. Like, is it just permission to play to say they need great food? Or is timeliness important? Because on an aircraft, it sure is. Or is, or, or is ease important to, somebody in HR that's calling to order catering for their office? They just need to be quick and easy. They don't want to sit down with me and talk about their dreams of food. You know what I mean? So it's just very different. And being able to identify that, you're right, Dave. I mean, it's huge. It's really important.
I want to come back to something because I know Rick, and for those entrepreneurs out there who work with a husband and wife team, you were saying earlier, he freaks out about it. You're like, I don't need to freak out about it. What, how do you maintain that balance? I mean, there's some secret sauce going on there for sure that I'm on the outside looking in. But what do you think, if there's anything or 1 or 2 things that you could share with entrepreneurs who are working with their spouses or partners, some words of advice?
Well, I mean, you probably already know in your gut if your relationship can handle something like that. There's a lot of people that know right off the bat that there's no way they could work with their husband 16 hours a day and then get excited to go home. It's a thing. I mean, that's I'm in a business group that I love, and that's a topic that actually comes up a lot for those of us that have decided to do this. To be completely frank with you, Dave, I think that's one of the main reasons I knew that I could even marry my husband, is because back in the day, he was running his business. I was working like 3 jobs, but when I was helping him with his business, it was literally like 14 hours a day. And then at the end of the day, I would say like, okay, now what are we going to do? Do you want to watch TV? Do you want to? And I was said, wow, like if I'm not ready to kill this guy, maybe I should consider marrying him. So I did. But yeah, we are an enigma. It is not for everybody. But I think it's got to be your best friend. I think you've got to be able to communicate, be honest, and be able to check it at the door, or you'll probably kill each other and go to jail.
Yeah, listen, outside in, you all have some secret sauce going on there, because I've seen the communication, and such a great guy. And I know how much you both put into the business to make it successful. And it's like I said, you probably someday you'll probably write a book on that, I think. Would be a great topic. Okay, so you were talking about mentorship earlier, right? Many entrepreneurs have mentors, role models. Are there any individuals or businesses or groups that you've joined, and would you recommend it? Obviously, I know you're going to recommend it, but what would you look for if you're starting new and you need a mentor to put that in place?
Okay, so somebody recommended this to me, and it was invaluable, and the journey is still ongoing, and I find so much value to it. So I started with a group called EO. It's an entrepreneurs organization. They have sort of a beginner's stepping stone to their group that's called Accelerator, for businesses that are just getting started out. And it's an opportunity for people that have like-minded interests with very different businesses. But the challenges all seem to be the same, like the same concerns about staffing or concerns about legalities or any of that. So that gets brought up, and really encouraged to read a lot of business books and get together and talk about it. And it's just been an unbelievable forum. And I myself started an accelerator. And then once you have been in that for a while and you reach a certain level in your business maturity financially, you can interview then to move on to EO. And man, that group of people is just amazing. And you can go to them with anything. It's like having an unbelievable network of support. Can't talk more highly about it.
That's fantastic. When you surround yourself with great leaders, great entrepreneurs, great friends, and great family. I mean, listen, sometimes we can't pick our family, but ultimately what it comes down to is when you surround yourself with those types of people who are successful, it's amazing how you start elevating your game because they're giving you ideas or maybe they're motivating you or whatever it might be. But that's a key.
It's like tennis or golf. You don't go and play with somebody that isn't as, you want to play with people that are better than you because it makes you better. Yeah,
better,
for
makes
sure.
you better. So I think that's a really good point. If you're somebody just getting into business, or even if you've been in business for years and you haven't really had somebody you could lean on, and it doesn't have to be a family member, it doesn't have to be somebody in your business. Actually, I'd recommend somebody outside your business. The years my businesses grew the most is where I had a consultant looking on the outside, looking in, because we get so wound up in the day-to-day and you're in the weeds and you're like, how do I attack this problem? And they come out, so take an outside look and they go, oh, here's what you do. And you're like, wow, I should have thought of that. But sometimes it's just an outside approach.
This group is real careful not to say, then do this, Right. But sometimes, gosh, I wish it were that easy, right? But
Right.
but it's more like of what they've been through, and hey, you're not alone. Like we've all been through this, blah blah. But it's a great. And then they also within that have mentorship programs, and there are other groups like this. Like I'm certainly not trying to be an infomercial for EO, but it really is amazing. And through that, you can get mentors and do things outside of your groups that you can constantly learn more. I mean, it's just amazing what you can do with them.
Yeah, it's really, when you again surround yourself like that, that's great that you've taken that step.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. I rarely use the C word of COVID-19 pandemic, but your business, I know specifically, was really challenged during that time. And I don't want to focus on the pandemic because that is behind us, but more importantly, the lessons you learned and took away from the experience, because I know it was gripping for you. Yeah. We had conversations at that time. I remember talking to you on the phone because we didn't know what was going on. But again, not so much the event, but what you learned from that squeeze.
Yeah. Squeeze. That's nice. Nice way to put that. I built a business around people gathering, and it became illegal for people to gather, which is just insane. So I truly learned the word pivot during that time and what that meant. And we did. Like the day that I noticed there wasn't stuff in the grocery store, I called my purveyor that day and said, "Is this going to be a problem for me? Is this just in the grocery stores, or do I still have an open line to food?" And the minute that I heard I had still an open line to food, we developed a grocery package, prepared meals package, pick up at our back door, so whatever that pivot would look like for you in any circumstance, right? Because I've had a number of hits, not just COVID, where you think that this is going to take your feet out. And as long as you just keep rolling with it, right? You don't like in my previous example, you can sit down on the floor, but you got to eventually get back up. So if you're really committed to getting back up, then you just figure it out. Like you just come up with and figure it out. I was very, very proud during that time that I was able to keep my whole staff during a time when, that just wasn't a thing, because we just figured it out and we came together as a family and stayed with our arms locked together and just got through it. And it's important you have a good culture where you're working, that people can trust you and know that you've got them,
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier, Emily. You had a vision of what you wanted to accomplish and you were committed to making it happen. And I'm not saying you solely, because you're only as good as your organization. We know that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the people who are involved with you. So for you to have that sort of leadership and be able to plow through that, I remember that time with you, and how creative you were getting. And it was really inspirational for me as well. So I really commend you on the way you plowed through that in such a gripping time. So, all right, a few more questions. Look into the future. What are your long-term goals for Emily's events, Fly Cuisine catering? I mean, where do you see your business in the next, 2 to 3 years, 5 years, maybe 10? I don't know. You'd look that far.
Yeah. Well, we've decided to scale Fly Cuisine. So that is something that we are going to look to go into other markets and expand that part of the business, leaving Emily's events and the private catering solely for Scottsdale. and Phoenix, whatever. But yeah, the 10-year plan is probably 15 stores, maybe 15 stores, maybe 13 in other cities and 2 across the pond. And then I think I'll work on an exit.
Because you want to go across the pond for sure.
I do. I do.
You do. I know you do. All right. Listen, one more question. Words of advice for any business owner who's going through a tough time right now in their business. Do you have any words of advice for them to plow through?
Find yourself some support and go back to the reason why you started this in the first place and take a look at it and decide if you're still committed to that, right? Mm-hmm. I got lucky to sort of sneak under the radar and make it through. It really depends on what you're looking to do and how committed you are, as we've said earlier. But I think, if you find support outside of your circle, maybe somebody that owns a business, somebody that inspired you. If you look back to why you even started this in the first place, reaching out to that person, or find somebody that you can reach out to and bounce this stuff off of and look for ways that you can survive. Because, I had a humongous client. I got that story too. I've got the humongous client that I thought, wow, if I ever lost this client, I'm going under. And we lost that client and we were okay. The things that you think that can take you out, you'd be surprised is that you can navigate them if you're committed to it and you're open to the idea of a pivot, not being so stringent. And also, I also think it's important to note that every client is an opportunity, right? And it should be viewed that way, and look at them and decide if they're a good fit, if you'd be a good fit for each other. I think the worst thing that you can do is take everything because you're trying to survive, even those that aren't the right fit. If they're not the right fit, it's going to take so much of your energy and you're going to wind up hating what you do. Yeah. So I'm not telling you to turn down business, but I'm telling you that it's not the end of the world if you do. Just make sure that it's a right fit and try to give yourself some realistic parameters to follow.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to, again, identifying your client, right? What do you want their average ticket to be? What do you want them to look like? What industry? Whatever that might be, because what happens is you start taking the smaller clients. I'm not saying the smaller clients aren't valuable, but for some businesses, it probably is. For others, stage that's more mature, you want things that are going to move the needle, because you're gonna do just as much work on the client that's 20% versus the client that's an 80% client, right? And we don't want to lose them, but by all means, I think that goes back to structuring your ideal client. And really, we touched on that like 3 times, but it keeps coming back full circle. And and the one thing I'll add to that too is, which I know you've always done, is even when you do pivot, trust the process, see it through, right? I think sometimes people get smacked around a little bit and they want to make a jump to another process. But if you formulated a nice plan for yourself, work through it, see through it, and trust that process. That's great. That's great.
And don't be so hard on yourself, right? Because the worst thing to learn is that everything is your responsibility. That's the good and the bad. So when there is a problem, even if you had nothing directly to do with it, it's still your problem because you haven't cast the vision right, or you haven't led them correctly. It always falls back on you, and be prepared for that. It's a lot of responsibility and a lot of disappointment to take on. So, but yeah, I don't regret a single day of it. People ask me all the time if I'm going to go back to school and finish that PhD. And well, now I think I've just gotten too old, but I don't regret a minute of it. I love what I do, and I'm excited to see what the next 10 years brings.
Yeah, you got the entrepreneurial PhD. That's what you got here. So listen, this has been fantastic. We're going to have you back on the show eventually when you're at that 15 mark, which might be sooner than you think. But I want to thank you for being here, Dave. If people want to look you up or check you out, where can they find you?
It's emily'sEventsAZ.com. Okay. It's the best way to do it. And you can reach out to me that way, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or if somebody just wants to jump on a call and chat about something you're going through, I'm happy to talk to anyone. So feel free to give me a call.
You are always so. What a great way to end that. What a great way to end that. So, Emily, thank you for being on the show. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. I know our guests have. And check us out at salesproformance.com. And Emily, they can find you actually on LinkedIn too, because I've seen the post on the most recent.
Yeah. Yep. Aussie's on fire. Yep.
As well. And thanks, everybody. Keep focusing on going pro, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Bye.